In the mid-20th century, Union Pacific built locomotives so powerful they could haul thousands of tons across steep mountain passes without a single helper engine. They were mechanical giants designed to tame the American West. These machines weren't built for show. They were a direct response to the challenges of hauling freight, where long distances, harsh weather, and steep terrain pushed equipment to the limit. Most railroads dealt with the problem by linking multiple engines together. Union Pacific took a different approach: build a single locomotive strong enough to handle the entire load on its own. This mindset led to a series of groundbreaking machines that stretched the limits of steam, diesel, and even turbine power. This is the story of Union Pacific's superpower fleet and how it reshaped railroading across North America. The end of World War I brought more than just peace. It triggered a surge in industrial activity across the U.S. Factories were ramping up, agriculture was booming, and goods of all kinds needed to move faster than ever before. Railroads were the backbone of that logistics chain, but they had a problem. Trains were getting longer and heavier, and the locomotives of the day simply couldn't keep up. The short-term solution? Link 2 or 3 locomotives together to pull a single train. It worked, but it came with major downsides. More engines meant more fuel, more crew members, and skyrocketing maintenance costs. It was a patch, not a solution. Union Pacific, however, wasn't interested in patches. They envisioned a new kind of locomotive, one that could haul the same weight alone. Why settle for a group of small machines when one massive one could do the job more efficiently? The goal wasn't to impress anyone, it was to solve a practical problem. This meant fewer locomotives, reduced overhead, fewer failures in the field, and faster turnaround times. Union Pacific's leadership began working with manufacturers and engineers to explore new types of engines. What they created in the following decades would completely transform American freight transportation and set the Pacific on a course to dominate the mountains and deserts of the West. In 1936, Union Pacific unveiled its first true leap into the world of locomotive superpower, the Challenger. Designed specifically for the grueling climbs of the Rockies and beyond, this wasn't just a big engine, it was a turning point. Sherman Hill in Wyoming and the Wasatch Mountains of Utah were notorious for their brutal grades and long hauls. Most railroads needed helper engines or stopped to rearrange their trains. UP wanted to keep rolling. The Challenger was their answer. It featured a 4-6-6-4 wheel arrangement, which used 2 sets of large driving wheels joined by a flexible frame, giving it both power and the ability to handle sharp mountain curves. This setup gave it more traction and allowed it to handle steep grades with ease. Roller bearings on every axle made it smoother and more efficient than previous engines, and it could hit 70 miles per hour, pulling a passenger train or haul over 100 loaded freight cars across punishing terrain without breaking a sweat. The articulated design was a game changer. The front half of the locomotive could swivel on its own, helping it stay on track through mountain passes that would derail most other engines of its size. And the engineers who ran them? They loved the Challenger. It was stable, easy to handle, and surprisingly forgiving at high speeds. Union Pacific initially ordered a small batch, but the results spoke for themselves. By the late 1940s, over 100 Challengers were storming through the Rockies. This success was proof that one locomotive really could do the work of many. But as the demands of global war loomed, even the Challenger's power wasn't enough. A new titan was coming. With America drawn into World War II, the nation's freight demand exploded. Coal, steel, tanks, grain, you name it, had to be moved coast to coast, and railroads became the supply lines of war. Even the Challenger began to strain under the loads, especially on the steep grades of the Rockies. Union Pacific, never one to compromise, went back to the drawing board. They wanted a single locomotive that could replace helper engines entirely, something that could do the job solo, no matter the terrain. The result was the 4000 class, Big Boy, an imposing 132 feet and weighing over 1.2 million pounds when coupled with its tender. This steam locomotive was the largest of its kind ever built. It had 16 massive driving wheels and an articulated frame similar to the Challenger, but bigger in every sense. Its boiler could hold 22,000 gallons of water, and it produced over 6,000 horsepower, enough to haul a 3,600-ton train over the toughest mountain passes without assistance. Only 25 big boys were ever made, all by the American Locomotive Company. But that was enough. Stationed strategically around Sherman Hill and the Wasatch Range, they ran around the clock, hauling war material across the West. These engines became essential during wartime, hauling everything from tanks to grain, often in extreme conditions that left no room for error. Rail fans still whisper about the big boy with awe, and it's easy to see why. Nothing before or since has matched its presence on the rails. It wasn't just big, it was a national icon. After the war, a new challenge emerged. Steam was dying. The future belonged to diesel-electric locomotives, cheaper to fuel and quicker to start. But Union Pacific didn't buy into the trend completely. To them, most diesel engines were just too weak. Replacing a big boy meant stringing together 5 or 6 smaller diesels, and that didn't sit right with UP's high horsepower philosophy. So they gambled on something bold: gas turbine electric locomotives, or GTELS, developed in partnership with General Electric. These experimental locomotives replaced traditional diesel engines with jet turbines. The second-generation GTELS, introduced in 1958, delivered an eye-opening 8,500 horsepower, making them the most powerful locomotives in the world at that time. Their appearance was just as extreme. Each turbine set spanned over 180 feet. Behind them trailed a giant tender hauling 24,000 gallons of thick bunker C fuel oil, a thick tar-like byproduct that was cheap at the time. They sounded like jet aircraft on wheels, hence the nickname Big Blows. Crews described their roar as deafening. Standing nearby felt like standing next to a jet engine at takeoff. But these beasts came with trade-offs. At high speeds, they performed beautifully, but at low speeds, or during frequent stops, they consumed fuel inefficiently. Maintenance was difficult, and bunker C oil, once cheap and plentiful, became more expensive as cleaner fuel regulations took hold. By 1969, the last turbine was retired. The dream of the ultimate single-unit locomotive dimmed once more. Still, these giants left a mark and showed Union Pacific wasn't afraid to bet big on the future, even if it meant bending the rules of locomotive design. By the 1960s, the age of steam and turbines was all but over. Diesel-electric power had won the war of economics. It was cleaner, easier to operate, and more adaptable. But while most railroads were content to run strings of modest diesels, Union Pacific's appetite for raw horsepower hadn't faded. They wanted to bring the superpower philosophy into the diesel era. The diesel age was a playground for experimentation. Union Pacific wasn't interested in the quiet, compact engines other railroads were adopting. They wanted monsters. So they partnered with every major builder, EMD, GE, Alco, and asked the same question: how much power can we fit on one frame? The results were wild. Some engines combined 2 power units into one hulking box. Others reused turbine parts on diesel platforms. One was so heavy, it cracked under its own weight. Not all of them worked. Some were short-lived, but everyone was a step toward the ultimate goal: building the biggest, baddest diesel on the rails. Some broke down constantly. Others burned through money faster than fuel, but all of them served one purpose: to test the threshold of diesel power and see how far it could go. Union Pacific wasn't interested in average locomotives. They wanted titans. They finally got one. Not another Frankenstein prototype, but a polished, production-grade diesel that embodied everything they'd been striving for. And it would be the largest diesel locomotive ever built. When the DDA-40X rolled off the assembly line in 1969, it marked the culmination of Union Pacific's superpower vision in diesel form. Nicknamed the Centennial in honor of the 100th anniversary of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, this locomotive was just historic. At 98 feet long and boasting 6,600 horsepower, the DDA-40X remains the most powerful single-unit diesel locomotive ever built. It housed 2 16-cylinder diesel engines, each powering its own generator and traction motors. The result was a locomotive that could easily outpull multiple standard units combined. Union Pacific ordered 47 of them and put them to work immediately. using them on long-haul freight routes where their power and range were fully tested under real-world conditions. Some clocked over 22,000 miles per month, racking up millions of miles in revenue service across the western U.S. The Centennial was also a test platform. The X stood for experimental. These engines pioneered modular electronics and control systems that would later become standard in modern locomotives. Maintenance crews admired them for their accessibility, and engineers loved the smooth, balanced ride despite their size. For 15 years, they hauled everything from mixed freight to high-priority goods. But the 1980s brought a shift towards smaller, standardized engines that were cheaper to build and easier to maintain in fleets. By 1984, the last DDA-40X was retired, and just like that, the age of the single-unit super locomotive came to a close. Still, no diesel has matched its scale since. The Centennial stands as the final word in locomotive ambition. Today, Union Pacific's active locomotive roster looks much like every other major railroad's. Sleek diesel-electric units producing around 4,400 to 4,500 horsepower, operating in pairs or trios depending on the load. They're efficient and standardized for cost and convenience, but those machines owe a silent debt to what came before. The legacy of Union Pacific's superpower fleet lives on, not just in preserved engines, but in the railroad's DNA. The pursuit of ultimate efficiency through brute strength, bold experimentation, and innovation still defines how UP approaches its equipment and infrastructure today. Of the hundreds of powerful machines UP once operated, only a handful remain. 2 Challengers, 8 Big Boys, 2 GTELS, and a few Centennials. The rest were scrapped. Steel giants lost to time, but a few survivors have been lovingly preserved, and some even restored. Chief among them is Big Boy 4014. Rescued from static display and painstakingly rebuilt by UP's Heritage Program, 4014 roared back to life in 2019, bringing steam and steel back to the main line after 6 decades. It now tours the country, a living legend that draws crowds by the thousands. Union Pacific also maintains Challenger 3985 and Centennial 6936 in its heritage fleet, showcasing the company's commitment to honoring its mechanical past. When one of these engines runs today, it's carrying the weight of decades of innovation and the history of American railroading, of a time when power was king. When railroads dared to build machines so bold, they still inspire awe long after their final run. Though the era of mechanical giants has passed, their spirit never left the rails. You don't see engines like that anymore. The ones Union Pacific ran through the 20th century were in a league of their own, built for tough terrain, heavy loads, and non-stop pressure. Most are gone now. A few are still around, sitting in museums or occasionally fired up for special runs. But their impact is still visible every day, in how freight moves, in how engines are designed, in the mindset of building something that lasts. And when people talk about the golden age of American railroads, they usually mean one thing: Union Pacific at full power. Want more untold stories from the age when machines ruled the land? Hit that like button, subscribe, and hop aboard for our next journey through railroading history. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.